everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the National Landlord Investment Show. I'm one of the directors here and founders of the show, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you that have come back today. As you know, there hasn't been a show in London for us since November 2019, and it's been a long journey, but we're back, and we're very, very, very grateful that you guys have come out today, and I'd just like to thank you for your support. I'd like to thank our team for helping to put us all of this together. It's been a long journey and it's been a hard journey for a lot of people. So I just want to say thank you very much on behalf of me, my husband Steve and our team. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our guests onto the stage and for this spectacular seminar, which is the impacts of COVID and Brexit on the UK property market and really what that has meant. So without further ado, if I'd like to introduce our panellists on stage.
Let's go, folks.
A warm welcome, please.
Thank you, go, Paul. That's number one.
That's on four.
Four. I think I was four.
I'll hand you over now to Andrew
Are you
Neil.
four? Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Are you sure?
I'm six for definite.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you. There are some seats there if you'd like to take them. I see it's standing room only at the back. We've got a busy hour ahead of us. We've assembled this panel for you. Our subject this morning is the impact of COVID and Brexit on the UK property market. Big subject, lots to cover. Want you to participate in this too, ask plenty of questions. Our panel this morning is Chris Bailey. He's runs the organisation Less Tax for Landlords. Not quite sure what that stands for, but there we go. Mira Chinburoy is the National Residential Landlords Association representative here today. David Smith of the Sunday Times. Cam Dovedi is the Premier Property Education Group, and Paul Champlina is the founder of Landlord Action and CCO of Hamilton Fraser. Give our panel a round of applause and welcome them. So to get things going, I'm going to ask each of the panel members just to set out their stall, give us the headlines of how they see things at the moment, and then we'll begin to dig deeper into it. If you want to ask a question or make a point, put your hand up and I'll get to you. I assume we've got microphones in the room somewhere, because the acoustics won't be too great otherwise. If not, we'll test that out in the reality. So what has the impact of COVID and Brexit on the UK property market been? David Smith.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think last time we did this was 2 years ago when we were discussing Brexit on Bonfire Night. So things have moved on quite a lot since then. The overwhelming thing I would say is that the behaviour of the housing market during the pandemic has been what nobody would have expected. I mean, if you go back to the first lockdown in March 2020, that was a time when the property market was closed for a couple of months, and it was a time when everybody feared that we would see the biggest increase in unemployment we've had in history. There were predictions around of 12-14% unemployment rate, 4 million people unemployed, and the prognostications, the forecasts for the housing market at that time were pretty dire. The fear was that we would see a housing market crash probably worse than in the financial crisis, maybe back to the kind of thing we saw in the early 90s. As you know, it's turned out very differently. You know, the cavalry came to the rescue. Almost immediately, we had a reduction in official interest rates to 0.1%. And maybe we'll talk a bit later about whether interest rates are going to go up and when. 0.1%, easily the lowest in history. The Bank of England's been around since 1694. Until 2009, bank rate had never been below 2%. 0.1% is a phenomenally low interest rate, plus more QE, quantitative easing, which boosted the market. We had the stamp duty cut, that wasn't announced till July, and we had people reassessing their housing needs in the light of working from home and all those things. So instead of a housing crash, we've seen a housing boom. We've seen transactions which dipped briefly, pick up very strongly, and 2021 housing transactions are likely to be the strongest for many, many years. And it's a market that I think is going to survive the removal of the stamp duty cut. The stamp duty reduction came to an end on September the 30th, but most of the readings for the housing market remain pretty strong in spite of that. So I would say it's been a surprising pandemic story. It's been like no other economic and housing cycle in history. Normally when the economy falls, and the economy fell a lot last year, the housing market does too. This time it didn't, and there's still a lot of buoyancy there. And I think, my fellow panelists will know more about this than I do, but I think some of that buoyancy is now being reflected in rental markets as well. That's my brief overview, Andrew.
David, let's just go straight to the big issue everybody's thinking about before I get the rest of the panel in. Are interest rates going to start rising before Christmas?
I think if interest rates don't rise before Christmas, then the markets the financial markets will believe that they've been sold a pup, because that is the signal that has been provided by the Bank of England and by the Bank of England governor, that the bank can't hang around too long before raising rates. But I think it's also important to put this into perspective. What financial markets expect is that over the next 12 months, bank rate will perhaps go to 0.75%, 0.75%, which is where we were, remember, in March 2020 before the reduction. This is not a high rate of interest. The Bank of England is going to do it very gradually if it can. Obviously there are worries out there about inflation at the moment, but the Bank of England is going to try and do this in a softly way, and in a way that doesn't frighten the horses, I think. So although interest rates are going up, I don't think people should necessarily be frightened of that. In the days when Andrew and I worked together, those are the days of real interest rate rises. The Bank of England rule was up in 2, in other words, up in 2 percentage points, down in 1, down 1 percentage point. What we're talking about, if there is a pre-Christmas rate rise, is going up from 0.1 to 0.25. So this is softly. This is in the foothills of interest rates compared with past history.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Mira, your overview of the impact of COVID and Brexit on the UK property market.
Well, for landlords, the biggest impact of COVID was the restrictions on possession.
No, we need to get the microphone on you properly. A technical hitch is a bit like being on GB News. Actually, probably not that bad.
Yeah, that's fine.
Try again, Mira. Let's
Can you
hear.
hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please.
So for landlords, the biggest impact of the pandemic was the restriction on possessions, which came in almost immediately after lockdown measures were brought in, and lasted with the closure of the courts until September of last year, and then with restrictions on enforcement of evictions until this spring. So there was a significant impact of that for landlords, particularly where tenants are struggling with rent arrears, and especially for those landlords who had been seeking possession prior to the pandemic and had seen their process completely stop. Now, we know that the majority of landlords and tenants worked together over the course of the pandemic to find ways to manage any struggles that tenants were facing due to the impact on their incomes. But there was no direct support into the private rental sector to support tenants who were most harshly affected by that financial impact. And there was no direct support to landlords either. who were not eligible for business bounce back loans or other support available. So there's been a real struggle over this year for those landlords, and we were glad to see this weekend that the government announced that there is going to be 65 million towards rent arrears that have built up from COVID-related reasons, but we estimate that the total amount of arrears is over 300 million.
Right.
And that hasn't reduced over the course of the past year. So this, whilst restrictions on possessions have lifted, there continues to be a huge backlog in the courts, which landlords are struggling with. There are still some measures in the courts to prioritise certain cases. So this continues to be a big challenge, which we are continuing to campaign on in order to address these arrears issues and also to bring in reforms to the courts to ensure that cases can be dealt with more quickly.
Thank you, Mira. Can you hear us all right? Because you can. You have to put your hearing aid up a bit. You can't afford mine. I'll try and get the panel to speak up though, because there is a bit of a hubbub outside, which makes it difficult. Paul, what's your overview of the impact of COVID and Brexit?
Well, I'll speak up so people normally hear me. I'm not that shy normally. But,
Good for you.
Firstly, I would say that landlords during COVID have been incredible, to be honest. And I think we should pat ourselves on the back because the uncertainty of where we were going, no one knew. You know, I've been collecting debt and chasing people down for years, and I thought that we were going to be falling off a cliff. I think the success of furlough has been inspirational. We talked about that before, maybe following the suit from Germany. But you had 11 million people on furlough and 1 million people up until September, which was after 18 months, 6 million people on universal credit. But who would have thought the property market would have gone up 11% during the pandemic? I mean, I think we got lucky as an industry when the property market opened in middle part of May. We got really lucky, 2 months into a lockdown, and actually shows that the housing market really underpins the economy. Tenant demand was really, really strong. Of course, you know, I wear many hats and people know me from running my business, Landlord Action. Obviously what Mira was saying, that the courts basically went on slow, went on stop for 18 months. We even started a mediation business up with the PRS when notice periods went to 6 months, and I was getting calls, 5 to 10 calls a day during the first lockdown from panicking landlords and panicking tenants. But I think the reality was that if you were in the commercial property market, you were going to get hit far worse than the resi market. You know, the resi markets that got affected was the student market, which overnight students weren't returning back to universities. The guaranteed rent market, people were defaulting on paying rents. And I think that there was a real coming together of landlords and tenants. And I've never seen it before from working with landlords and letting agents for 30 years, where, you know, we even set up a landlord hero section on Landlord Zone of amazing stories where landlords were giving rent-free periods, buying, shopping, you know, giving free rents to key workers. So they were challenging times, but let's remember, you know, in this day and age now, you landlords, and you might be doing it a long time, you have to be professional. The game has changed so much in the last 3 years, but as an economy and where we're at with the housing market, the rental market, really, really buoyant, and tenants are clambering over really good rental properties. And rents, you know, the average rent in London is now over £2,000 a month, Andrew.
Okay, thank you for that. Cam?
So, speaking as an investor developer, one of the things that I'm sure you'd all agree is that it's been challenging times.
No, you're not.
Nope.
Just bring in a microphone.
Challenging.
We use this? Here.
So,
No, the red light means it's on. Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. You have to speak into it.
brilliant, thank you.
It's highly technical, you know, but that's what I'm paid for.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So, as an investor developer, what I was saying is that, would you agree that all of our lives have really been challenged by the pandemic? Many of our lives have been touched by all of this, unfortunately. However, one of the key things amongst this, as an investor, is, and it's all about adapting. the key word is adapt. And it's about navigating through the challenges, which is exactly what we've all been doing, haven't we? Yeah? So specifically, there's been many opportunities, and there's opportunities right now. So specifically, throughout the lockdown, we were purchasing properties where the competition was diminished because estate agents weren't allowing viewings. So we were able to actually fast track that and get sales agreed and do the viewings before exchange of contracts. So there were hacks and ways around that. Also, as we're noticing, finance is considerably very cost effective right now. In fact, in terms of the finance that we take at Premier and you guys are taking, it's hovering around the 3% mark. And usually it normalizes around the 6% mark. So if you think about that, finance right now is 50% discounted, isn't it? Really cost-effective finance, which is available. That's what we're finding. So there's things like this. So, and also, Paul touched on this, in terms of the market being open. We are quite lucky in the way that in the property industry, the market's been open, hasn't it? Yes, there's been challenges getting material, etc. But unlike the hospitality market, etc., the property market has been open, and it still is open. And just being honest with you, going forward, it really is a time for people who are treating property as a business. So the speculators have gone, and people like you are here to stay as business people thinking property as a business. So that's what we're doing.
Cam, thank you for that. We'll see if the audience agrees. But so far, Chris, what I hear is pandemic. Pandemic? What pandemic?
Exactly.
Buy-to-let's in great shape.
Do I need a microphone or can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Hear you? Good. Well, I'm sure you can hear me, David. You're next to me. But what about others? So yeah, I think we need to look at it from my point of view, I look at it from 2 or 3 angles. I'm a landlord myself. We've had issues. I mean, I'm sure I'll see nodding heads when I say try and get a tradesman to do anything at the moment. We can't get tradesmen, they're all doing jobs elsewhere. I'm also a tax accountant, so therefore I'm looking at tax effects, and a lot of you landlords will be hit in January 22 with your first really big tax liability, because that's when Section 24 has come in 100% and you've got to pay your first tax liability. So you need to all look out for that, you need to be preparing for it. You need to understand what that means in terms of cash, money, because remember, that relates to March 20. So that's the period March 20 to April 21 is when that tax return will be filed in January 22. So you've got to be aware of that. You need to understand it. Obviously, you're all now running your property businesses as a business. Obviously, you're all not accidental landlords because according to the government, all those have left the industry. Well, they clearly haven't, have they? They clearly haven't. And there's all sorts of rumours flying around at the moment around capital gains tax. Is that going to increase up to level with income tax rates? That could mean 40% capital gains tax. These are real issues that the sector faces. And you need to understand these issues and plan. Plan, 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 plan. That's what you need to do. If you think back to 18 months ago, in February, no one would ever know what was going to happen. You couldn't plan. You planned for the unexpected. What could you do? You can't do anything. Then suddenly, March the 22nd, was it? We were all in lockdown. We were all shut in our homes. Having to actually live with the wife. That's the worst thing, isn't it? Talk to the wife. Crikey Moses. Love the kids. Oh my God. And then 3 months later, we're out, and then we're back in again. They're already talking about what's going to happen in November and December this year. You need to be planning ahead. That's what you need to be doing.
Chris, David, let me pick up on a point Chris just made there. Now, we've had a Tory government that's increased national insurance contributions for both employees and employers. It's increased quite substantially corporation tax, I think from 19 to 25% coming up by 2023. Is it really conceivable it would also increase capital gains tax?
Well, it's a very good question, Andrew. And we've got the budget tomorrow, and never make predictions. Have I gone
I
well?
think if we use this handheld mic, I think it's probably the best of all. On you go, David.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we've got the budget tomorrow, and it's always dangerous to make predictions so close to an event. But I think we've seen so much in terms of tax increases this year. The tax increases announced this year, which Andrew mentioned, corporation tax going up from 19 to 25%. It's a pretty good rule of thumb for the Johnson government to look at everything that David Cameron and George Osborne did and say they'll do the opposite, because, Cameron and Osborne made a big thing about reducing corporation tax. Johnson and Sunak are increasing it. Income tax is going up in a stealthy way because from next April, income tax allowances and thresholds will be frozen. National insurance, Andrew mentioned, a bigger increase than Gordon Brown announced in the early 2000s. 1.25% for employers and employees, and all that adds up to a 35 to 40 billion annual tax increase when this all comes through. And although you can never say never, I think it would be surprising in the budget tomorrow if we saw any further significant tax increases. And my own view about capital gains tax is that the Chancellor was frightened away from that by the outcry from Tory supporting entrepreneurs before his March budget. I mean, there's no doubt that was on the Treasury's mind before the March budget this year. I think he's been frightened away from that. So although we've got loads and loads of pre-budget announcements coming through, and although there will still be surprises, I'd be somewhat surprised. I would be surprised if those rabbits out of the hat that have been kept back involved substantial further tax increases, because simply we've had so many already this year.
David, thank you for that. So the overall impression the panel is giving is that the property sector, particularly the part of the property sector that you're mainly involved in, is actually in quite rude health, better health than we could ever have hoped for a year ago or 18 months ago when this whole pandemic business started. But of course, it's not without its problems, and I hope we'll hear from you. If you want to make a point, just put your hand up. We'll get a microphone to you. But let me look at some of the issues that have arisen over this and come to you first, Paul. How big a problem now are rent arrears that have accumulated during the pandemic?
So, as Neil said, it was the landlords that had cases in the court system when obviously lockdown happened and then the court stopped, were worse affected. I've got a worse case of now actually £144,000 rent arrears. We've got a record amount now of landlords that go more than 12 months than ever before. And I've had to recruit 3 solicitors and someone in my debt recovery department just to deal with the demand.
So there's always jobs for lawyers.
There's always jobs for lawyers. We charge 16, please know, right? But more importantly, what happened was, as Neil said, is the court systems were slowed up. They brought in review hearings, which were like telephone hearings, to slow everything up, which were a waste of time really. And and obviously mediation is really important. You've got to do it at the beginning of the process, at notice stage, and for the courts and the civil servants, for their wisdom, they brought it in after, between review hearing and hearing stage. But by that time, the courts have bolted and relationships have broken down. I would say to you, courts now where we're at, some courts are better than others. The city courts, where there's more buy-to-let, there's waiting time. But we have a shortage of judges. They have a massive recruitment problem pre-pandemic, and judges around was at an all-time low, and there was fear of mental health in the courtroom. I was speaking to judges, and of course bailiffs. Bailiffs are on £20,000 a year. They can't recruit bailiffs. So what is on the horizon, I'm sure we're going to touch on it, is obviously the banning of Section 21, the abolishment of Section 21. And if you don't have major investment in the court system, the recruitment of judges and bailiffs, you strengthen the grounds of Section 8. Have mediation. If those things aren't in place, and I think the abolishment of Section 21, it will be one of the biggest things to change in the private rental sector. We don't get that right, and we're not hearing from the Ministry of Justice with regard to court investment. I have more worry about that.
Well, apparently the Chancellor tomorrow is going to pour some more money into the courts. Whether it's enough, of course, is another matter. Mira, do we have any idea of the scale of rent arrears? I mean, is it a danger to the business? Is it a danger to individual landlords?
So the amount of arrears in the sector tripled over the course of 2020. and that percentage has reduced slightly since the beginning of this year, as people have returned to work, as the economy has recovered. But we know that there's this sticky 300 million plus of arrears which remain in the sector. For the majority of landlords, that's a smaller amount of arrears, and many have been able to absorb those losses. But for some landlords, as Paul alluded to, there are quite substantial amounts.
It's a serious problem.
And it's a serious problem.
Some of that money will never be recovered, will it?
Some of it won't be recovered, and that's what the issue is that actually these might have been tenancies which otherwise would have been very successful tenancies. But if the landlord can't absorb those arrears, these tenancies are going to end, and that tenant is then going to struggle to find another property within the private renters sector.
Collecting the money from a tenant is one of the hardest things
To do. Chris, David alluded to we're in a more inflationary time. It's not a return to the 70s or the 80s, but certainly it's a difference from a period where inflation has been basically on its back. And it seems you just open the papers or watch television, the cost of everything is going up. Not just energy, though that's the most obvious. But almost everything is going up. The cost of labor is going up. The cost of materials is going up. The cost of getting people to come in and fix the plumbing, electricity. We are moving to a period where costs are rising. What are the implications for the buy-to-let sector in a period of rising prices and scarcity?
Well, you've got to look at two sides, haven't you, Andrew? You've got to look at the first side is if you're running a business, then your costs are going to go up. So therefore, simple terms, is your income going to go up? So are you going to be able to increase the rents? Now we've heard, or even Mira, that yes, the rents are going up, but are they going up significantly enough to cover that increase in costs? Are you still running your business at a profit? Is your business making money or losing money? Simple sums. Money in, less money out. Easy sums. But then we have to figure in one of the biggest costs in a property business, tax. We now no longer can deduct our mortgage interest, so that tax liability goes up. How many of the people in the audience, when they think about rents in and costs out, actually add their tax bill onto that to see if they're actually making money or losing money? How many people have to fund their business every month to keep it going? Especially during the last 12 months that we've had, where you maybe had void periods, you've had tenants not paying, but you've still got to pay everything else. All the bills are still accruing. So how have people dealt with that? Well, what they've done is the good old British way, haven't they? Got in dirty and just dealt with it. Just done it. That's what they've done. They've just done it. They've changed the way they deal. They've adapted, as Cam says. That's what we've done. The industry had adapted, and we're now moving forward into, hopefully, touch wood if it is wood, a brighter future, hopefully.
Cam, from the figures I saw from Hamptons, there seems to be a shortage of rental supply and a rise in rental demand. Doesn't that inevitably mean that the rising cost base that we're talking about and the rising tax base, which is part of the cost of doing business, that will be reflected in rising rents? People will put their rents up.
So yes, what we're finding in the right areas is that rents are actually going up in the right areas. So what we call this is the gold mine area, depending upon your strategy in property. And I love property. It's a serious vehicle where you can leverage a number of things. Two of the key ones, which one of them Chris has just touched on, is tax. As an investor developer, tax is a choice. You can choose to pay as much tax or as little tax according to HMRC's guidelines. It is really a choice. You just got to learn how to do it. So specifically, Section 24, we're all familiar with Section 24, the tenant tax, yes? That is the best thing that could actually happen to a business person in property. Because what many people miss is the simplistic items that are right in front of your face that you can actually make work. So specifically, feel free to write this down. BIM 46900. That's the Business Income Manual 46900. Now, BIM 46900 will do a couple of things for you. If you've got insomnia, it will cure it. Secondly, it will allow you to minimize your taxation to the extent that you want to. Now, I'm not saying do a Starbucks. Of course, we are responsible landlords. We want to pay tax. And we want to make sure it's according to HMRC's guidelines, yes? Yeah? However, BIM 46900 in a nutshell, quickly, is you can use, if you are an active landlord and you are purchasing, you're buying property that is tired and you are bringing it back into good condition, you can use your repair, replace and renew, which is allowable by HMRC. Check out BIM 46900 and you can minimize taxation to the extent that you want to, according to HMRC's guidelines. That's just one. We could go on, but I won't.
Are you an investor or a tax advisor?
That's a really good question. I'm an investor developer, but it's quite ironic that you have to bring these entrepreneurial ideas to the tax experts to say, can I do this? And usually the answer is no, you can't. And then you say, could you just please check for me? How about if I do this? And they say, oh yeah, of course you can do that. In my experience, wise people usually are telling you what you can't do. People that are simple-minded, like myself, they find ways and avenues of actually making it work. And you know when you have to bring it to them and confirm it.
Is there anyone in the audience from HMRC who would like to comment on this? Or meet Cam after the event? Now remember, we'd still like to hear from you too. Yeah, the gentleman's got his hand up there. Let's go. We need to get a microphone. We've only got one mic. See, we still live in times of austerity. One mic, and we're not even sure if it works.
Mike, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, but you will have to speak up.
Right. My question is for two questions quickly for David Smith, please. Is that possible? Can you hear me?
We can. If we can't, you will know.
Right. The first question is, I read an article by someone called Akhil Patel about in Money Week in July 2021, which you may have read, I hope. It talks about an 18 to 20 year cycle. Now we all know there's thought to be about a 10-year cycle in London, and he predicts that the 20-year or 18 to 20 year cycle, which ended, well, the last end was 2027, has a mid-dip, which was about 2016, and we're now starting the last bit of that cycle, which will take us to 2026-ish, and then there'll be a crash.
What's the question?
Sorry, do you
I'm
agree?
already at 2026, I haven't got a question.
That's the first thing. Do you agree with that 20-year cycle or 10-year cycle theory?
Well, let me ask David that first, and then we... No, hold on, I'm going to do it one at a time. If your second question's as long as the first, we'll be here till Christmas. We'll be here to 2026, and then you'll have the bloody answer without having to ask David. David.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, these ideas of long cycles, I mean, one of them was traditionally associated with the late Russian economist Kondratiev, 20 year up, 20 year down. But this one I think you're talking about is someone called Fred Harrison, who claims to have predicted the financial crisis, and 20 years on takes you to your date. I find that every year that passes, more people claim to have predicted the global financial crisis. In fact, very few did at the time. But I've looked at this, I've looked at the Fred Harrison stuff, and I don't think there is any sound basis for it at all.
No long-term cycle like that over
no.
20. There usually isn't, actually, in economics. Against my better judgment, I'm coming back for a second question, provided you don't get to 2030.
When will the next election be, please?
You're asking David Smith that? No, you don't get to answer your own question. He is the economic editor of the Sunday Times, not the political editor. Anyway, when's the next election? As if we would know.
I mean, there's quite a lot of talk.
Even Bojo doesn't know.
There's quite a lot of talk around about getting the election in before the full effects of the tax increases come through. So that would imply a 2023 election, spring 2023. But I don't know. I mean, I think this government may need as long as it can have, you know. So So that would take us till, I think, Andrew, till the end of 2024, because
Well,
the election
the election
was
last
December
election
2019.
was December 2019, so constitutionally there doesn't have to be one until December 2024. But no government is going to lock itself into a winter election that it can't get out of. So I think you're more likely, if it goes to 2024, to see an election in the spring of 24. But I wouldn't rule out, depending on how the economy is going and what other global factors are at work, of seeing election perhaps in the spring of 2023 or even the autumn, early autumn of 2023. The bottom line is we haven't got a clue. And neither does the cabinet and neither does the prime minister. He will wait and see. All I would say is that the only people who lock themselves into the last possible date are prime ministers who think they're going to lose. So John Major did that in 1997, waited to the last possible minute. He lost. Gordon Brown did that in 2010. He lost. So if it is December 2024, or at least late 24, it probably means the Prime Minister thinks he's going to lose. Any more questions on the floor? Well, I've got your attention. There's a gentleman here.
Hello. Will the panel support a scheme where to stabilise the rental market, where tenants that are in arrears and are not paying their rent to be on some sort of official register, so that everyone can see, like any other business, like CCJs or whatever, but like this tenant is unreliable, or with some comments.
Oh, you mean like a blacklist of people that haven't paid their rent?
In a way, you could say that, but they can make comments.
I just did.
Yes, and the tenants can make comments and put their input in, but some sort of register. So
Like I had no money, I couldn't pay the rent.
So the landlord.
So this is a proposal, yeah?
Yes, for potential tenants.
Okay, well
renting the property.
let me go straight then to Paul.
So it will never happen, is the answer to your question. I proposed it to the government, well, on the working group of both landlords and letting agents, which, for their great wisdom, they only produce, and the local authorities did only have sight of that list. But when I did raise it at the time, I got looked at like I was an alien. It won't happen. It's in Australia. All I can say to landlords, because rental arrears are higher now more than ever before, and landlords have been using Section 21, they have to use Section 8, but Section 21 is going to go in a couple of years, is you have to start enforcing the money orders. When you enforce the money orders, it will show its account court judgment. It lasts for 6 years. Okay? And then when you do a search, I mean obviously what happens when Section 21 is banned, there's going to be much more diligent investment in it's going to happen. And that's going to affect the more vulnerable tenants, housing benefit tenants without a doubt. But it should happen, I totally agree with it. I've been calling it out for years.
But it won't.
I would definitely have it. But the reason it won't happen because it will create more homelessness and more vulnerable tenants won't be able to be rehoused.
Because if you're on the list, it would be tough to...
Exactly, and the problem you've got is, and what does happen, and I'm not saying any landlords in the room do it, but when landlords have asked for previous landlords reference, you get landlords that lie, and they say, oh, they're a great tenant, but really they've been a poor tenant, and they have rent arrears, and they pass the problem on because they don't want to wait 6 months for more unpaid rent and eviction. It's a real hindrance. We've been asking for years, but I can't see it ever happening. But you have to enforce a money order, and then it becomes registered to county court judgment. Then the next landlord can pick it up.
Okay, I think the lady over there's got a microphone. We'll get it to you.
Thank you. I wanted to hear the panel's views on the London property market, given it was, well, the hardest hit during COVID in terms of house prices, and in terms of rental demand, as a lot of Europeans left as a result of Brexit and also COVID, and the migration out to suburbs for outdoor space. What are the views of the panel on the prospects?
Okay, so the London property market, because there's more than one in a way. Mira, let's hear about it.
Yeah, what we've seen over the course of, sorry, I'm going to try and speak into my mic, so sorry, I'm not looking at you. What we've seen over the course of the past year is that London's acted very differently to the rest of the country. So whereas demand has been increasing in the rest of the country, particularly in inner London, that hasn't been reflected. And landlords with properties in inner London have been the least confident about the future of their businesses. I think there's potential for that to shift as people return to the office and as we see the economy recovering. But there is a significant challenge ahead for London landlords because of the nature of their businesses and the nature of the types of properties that they have. So the difference between outer London and inner London has been quite notable. Outer London has kept track with the rest of the country much more, and that's because there are larger properties, there are gardens and so on. So I think that is, we're going to have to see what that return to city life is like in order for London landlords to be able to see what the future holds for their businesses. But definitely rents have dropped in central London compared to in other parts of the country where we've seen rents rising.
David, aren't there some recent signs of the London property market, whether it's the outer boroughs or inner London, is coming back with a bang? I mean, Marsh and Parsons, in their recent survey, they said that there were now 31 tenants chasing every letting.
Yes, there are. The latest surveys are quite strong for London. I mean, particularly prime central London, you know, and it's a product of something you were talking about earlier, which is supply and demand. The demand is there, supply of rental properties is down. One thing about London worth bearing in mind is that London has been the furlough capital of the UK. You know, if you look at the 9 areas of the UK with the highest proportion of people on furlough, 9 out of 10 were London boroughs. The other one was the area around Gatwick Airport, Hawley and so on, where obviously the air transport has been severely affected. Now, furlough has been a great thing in terms of keeping unemployment down, but also it's closely entangled with this, you know, how many EU migrants went back home. Some people were suggesting 1 million a few months ago. The ONS thinks it's probably about a fifth of that, but they don't really know because we've never been able to measure migration particularly effectively. But the furlough scheme, you know, as you would know, and as taxpayers you may be slightly alarmed about, there was nothing to stop furloughed workers going back to EU countries. You know, they could be furloughed and back in Poland or France or anywhere else. And of course there was nothing to one of the reasons we've got so many vacancies at the moment was that there was nothing to stop them taking another job. In fact, they were encouraged to take another job. I mean, if you were furloughed by Wetherspoons, you could take a job as a Tesco delivery driver, perfectly legitimately.
And you still got the furlough money.
You got the furlough money.
And the money from Tesco.
And the money from Tesco.
Well, now you tell me about that.
Yeah. Andrew, there was
maybe Sainsbury's or
Andrew, there was an opportunity for you there when you were furloughed from GB News, you know. So,
they didn't pay me anything.
So the London, the London market is very interesting. It certainly is coming back at the moment, and I suspect some of those furloughed EU migrants have been coming back as well, which is adding to tenant demand.
Right. There's quite a lot I want to get through, and we're running out of time. So let me come to you on this. During the pandemic, as people were working from home and the lockdown was taking place, there was quite a lot of talk in the media about people reevaluating where they wanted to live, where they wanted to rent, that if there was going to be more working from home, they'd maybe get out of a small apartment in the city centre and move to the suburbs or beyond, more into the country, get a property with a garden where you could have an office and so on. Is that reflected? Has that happened? And is it reflected in rental demand in different places now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and for sure, we have 5 specific areas across the country that we invest in, and they are all different. Sometimes it feels like a different country. I'm sure some of you can relate to this. And, you know, coming back to the point about London, what we're finding is that there is outward migration into satellite towns. So not just London, Think of other large cities that you're aware of, such as Birmingham, so on. People are migrating into satellite towns because no one's a fool. They're now understanding that, you know what, they can actually work part-time. They can actually be in an area where they can commute to very quickly.
And they don't have to commute every day.
Exactly. They don't have to commute every day. So that is happening. Also, coming back to the point the lady mentioned over there about London, as a London investor, what we're also doing is we're adapting. So the adaptation is thinking about where you are in your journey and moving forward into other strategies. So for example, in large cities right now, how about looking at your secondary parades or tertiary parades, commercial properties where you can bring back into good condition, which right now, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, have gone to the wayside. You can bring them back into the private rented sector. This is what we're doing as well. And you can convert these. And there are such great rules right now when it comes to developing and PD, which you can use to your advantage. In fact, after this presentation, so much to say. We haven't got enough time, have we? Right, so much to say. I've got a presentation.
You should set up a little table over there, and I'll sell the tickets. 50-50. Is that all right?
Sounds good. We actually got a presentation straight after this, so feel free to join us after this. And at 12 o'clock, I'm going to be doing a presentation about specifically PD and development. Who's actually interested in that, by the way?
Right. I want to move on. Chris, you were the one that mentioned tax earlier. And of course, the HMRC made a lot of pre-pandemic changes on what tax reliefs were allowed and stamp duty, what was deductible. It seemed like an attempt to force people into companies rather than operating as individuals. Do we have any idea what HMRC's next territorial demands are going to be?
Thanks for the easy question. I don't think HMRC...
If any.
I don't think HMRC know what's going to come next. At the moment they're dealing with lots of furlough issues, COVID issues, all the way through. I think they've got 3 or 4 routes that they could potentially go down. We've already mentioned capital gains tax. David doesn't think that's going to happen. I think it's an easy win.
What else could they do?
It's an easy win. They could do lots of other things, Andrew. They could attack the tax credit that you get. So at the moment you get a 20% tax credit against your mortgage interest. They could reduce that down to 10%, 15%, 5%. They could attack that. That's an easy way to attack all you rich landlords, because that's the way they put it across all the time. Attack the rich landlord, why not? What they don't realise is that we're all running our own small business. That's what we are. They could increase national insurance that they already have done, but keep it going even higher. When you get pushed into a limited company that everyone rushed into 4 or 5 years ago, they've already looked at, or they already have increased corporation tax rates.
Because of course those who've gone into limited companies will now face the higher rate of CT from the
higher corporation tax rate and higher dividend tax rate.
Higher dividend tax.
So do you realise it's going to cost more than 50% to get your own money out of your own limited company? It's a fortune. It would have been better if you to stay as you were, because then you'd only pay 40%. That's obviously a very generalistic point of view.
So what you're saying is HMRC may not be over with you yet?
I don't think so.
All right. Mira, let me come to you. The Renters Reform Bill, how important is that?
It will, when it comes forward, if it comes forward, it will be the biggest change to the sector for over
So just to establish, where is it in the legislative process at the moment?
It hasn't even started.
So they've not published the bill, but they've given an idea of what might be in it?
Well, the government has said that they're going to publish a white paper later this year. But we are still engaged with the government on the discussion around the policy issues that will be covered in the white paper. So there isn't a bill yet, but the issues that will be covered within the white paper include, as Paul mentioned, possession reform, changes to Section 8, changes to the courts, also improvements in enforcement, a lifetime deposit scheme to support tenants to move deposits between tenancies more easily, a redress scheme for landlords, the potential of a register. There's a huge amount that will be in that white paper.
So it's something everyone needs to keep an eye on.
Everyone needs
even
to
though we don't have a clear idea yet of the timetable.
No.
That's about all right. Okay, Paul, let me come to you on this. It's clear from what David's saying that even if interest rates don't rise this year, before Christmas. They are going to rise in small incremental stages through 2022 and probably into 2023. What are the implications then for mortgages and for landlords on mortgages if interest rates start to rise like that? Not massively, but start to rise.
I think, as a whole, I think landlords generally, some landlords have had really short memories. Borrowing is at an unbelievable low, okay? And even if it locks in, by the end of next year, I mean, I think there may be, 0.25 rise by Christmas, and then maybe 1% by the end of next year.
Going up in increments through.
Increments or whatever, but we talked about it beforehand when I used to do housing possessions and landlords and some more mature landlords in the audience, in there, in front there, he remembers the interest rate of 14-15%. I mean, in the last 10 years, landlords have had it really, really good. So, you lock in, on a 3-year deal, whatever. I think that the problem that we had when we started mortgage brokers in lockdown, and when obviously in the frenzy, but everything took absolutely ages. You couldn't get through to the banks and solicitors, you couldn't do local authority searches.
But is there a case, Paul, for going in, getting a mortgage now and locking it in over 3 to 5 years at current levels of interest?
Yes, I mean, I'm looking at investing in the Northwest. I'm doing that.
Right, so that's something. And do we know how leveraged landlords are? Is there a lot of debt out there that will cost more to service with interest rates going up?
I mean, look, depending on obviously on the various different products out there, 75% of loan to value or whatever. I mean, I think what's really, really important, and Chris alluded to this, I just think now the game with tax, and you're getting hit at all different angles, the tax plan, and obviously when lenders are looking at those applications, they're looking at that stress testing with taxes, and that has to be massively part of with regards to your planning. But rents are rising, demand is really, really strong all over the country, and the reality is, people need to sleep somewhere, and obviously first-time buyers and help to buy whatever, it's not really having a big dent.
I understand. We're coming to the end of our time, but if there's a couple more comments from the floor, we can slip them in. Anybody wish to raise some points, questions? Yes. Keep your hand up and we'll get the mic to you.
Can you hear me? Sorry to ask David again, but you mentioned Boris and Rishi possibly doing the opposite of George and David. Is there any chance at all that the 12% stamp duty might come down, do you think? So are they going to reverse it to the extent that they would remove the premium? Is that what you're saying, the 3% premium? I don't think that would be a priority for the Chancellor when he will say, one thing he'll say tomorrow is that money is quite tight, even though you may have seen in your newspapers on the BBC and other channels that there's been a flurry of announcements of extra public spending. Most of that is just allocating stuff that was already intended to be spent. I fear that removing that stamp duty premium is not on the top 10 list of Treasury priorities at the moment. I'm sorry to say that.
But stamp duty used to be a marginal tax of almost no importance. It didn't raise much money. It's a transaction tax, which is usually a bad kind of tax, property tax. I think starting with Gordon Brown and continued under the Tories, it's become a real revenue raiser now.
It has, and clearly, as we've been hearing, the reduction was one of the factors which led to this surprising pandemic result for the housing market. I mean, Andrew, it is actually more of a marginal tax now than it used to be. It applies at different levels of house prices. You get into a higher marginal rate.
No, by
whereas
marginal,
I meant
unimportant.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point.
Not marginal in terms of tax rates.
It used to be a slab rate, as you know. Yeah, you paid it on. No, it raises significant revenue, and I can remember, and this.
this must have been in your. This was when you were editor, Andrew, I think, or just after you left us. Ed Balls, who was an advisor to Gordon Brown, saying to me, "There's nothing for your readers to be worried about on stamp duty in the forthcoming budget, whenever it was." And then they duly raised stamp duty, even though we said they wouldn't. And he said, "Well, we didn't think your readers would be affected by putting stamp duty on properties over 500,000." You know, and I had to tell him, "Well, we do have quite a lot of readers like that, you know, and they're badly affected, and they've all written to me." So yeah, that was the start of it, and it's a classic stealth tax. You know, people pay it infrequently. You know, if you're a landlord, you pay it more frequently. But it used to be that people moved house on average once every 7 years. Now it's much longer than that. So you only notice it when you move in terms of the general public. Yeah.
We're coming to the end of our time. Mira, I just want to come to you. What chances do you think of a national registration scheme, a compulsory national registration scheme for landlords? Because I see it's been talked about.
It is being talked about, and the government's exploring this as part of their white paper, as I mentioned. What we propose in our shadow white paper is that the mandatory redress scheme that comes in could be used as a way to ensure that there's better compliance within the sector through a kind of property MOT style approach, and that actually negates the need for a landlord register, because all landlords will be registered with the redress scheme, so why would you need an additional register on top of that? The benefit of having a redress scheme alongside something like a property MOT is that it reduces the need for having discretionary licensing schemes, which we know can be expensive, can be ineffective, and landlords just don't see the benefit of this. So a much cheaper option would be to use a redress scheme to give that confidence to tenants, but also make sure that there is an excess in regulation in the sector and that you're increasing with similar but different aspects, so that landlords have to tick multiple different boxes for the same effect.
We're going to have to leave it there. We've come to the end of our time. I thank you all for coming. I congratulate you on how you've come through the pandemic in such great shape. Better than I think most of you thought you would have come through it as well. And having come through it, it seems to me, just doing some research for this, that the prospects for your sector are actually pretty bright and you're in a good place. So well done on that too. Let's look forward to a new year in which the pandemic continues to recede, and as a country and as individuals, we continue to prosper. Thank you for coming. Before you go, a big round of applause for the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If everyone could exit the round that way there, please, guys. Yeah?
Thank you, team. Well done.
Thank you.
Oh, they can't do this again. They can't do it again like that.